Today, we're diving into a high-stakes global conflict that isn't being fought with soldiers, but with semiconductors. And let me tell you, it's a war where the rules are literally being written as we go.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a quote that should stop anyone following this topic dead in their tracks. The word for lithography machine does not appear once in China's 15th five-year plan. Now, for anyone who knows this space, that is a bombshell. Why on earth would Beijing suddenly go silent on the one piece of equipment that's at the very heart of this entire fight?
And that leads us to the big question we're going to investigate today. Has Beijing actually thrown in the towel on the chip war? Well, the answer, as we're about to unpack, is way more complex and, frankly, way more interesting than a simple yes or no.
To really get what's happening now, we have to rewind the clock a little bit to the event that set this whole thing in motion. Let's start with what our source material calls Washington's technology shock. So the fuse was lit back in October 2022. The U.S. government rolled out the most sweeping technology export controls in its history. And these weren't just broad general sanctions. No, this was surgical. The controls went right after three key areas: advanced semiconductors, the incredibly complex software you need to design them, and, of course, the hyper-advanced manufacturing equipment required to produce them. Now, what's really fascinating is that this policy had two distinct goals. The one they talked about publicly was pretty clear: slow down China's progress in artificial intelligence by an entire generation. But there was this other, unstated objective, and that was to force America's key allies, the Netherlands, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, to get on board and align their own export controls. The idea was to create a united technological front. So, the billion-dollar question. Did this super aggressive policy actually work? Well, yes, but it also backfired in a way that very few people saw coming. And this brings us to the sanctions paradoxical effect. And this really shows you the paradox perfectly. Just look at these numbers from TrendForce. Before the sanctions, China's homegrown chips made up about 15% of its own AI chip market. The projection for 2026? A massive 50%. So instead of crippling the industry, it's like the sanctions threw gasoline on the fire. And here's the crucial point. Being denied access to this technology didn't make China surrender. It actually spurred creation. Beijing responded by launching what is being described as the most ambitious, state-directed tech self-sufficiency program since the Soviet space race. It's this massive national effort to build everything it can no longer buy. This leads us to China's new strategy, and it's where we get the answer about that missing lithography machine. The 15th five-year plan introduced this new strategic term, Mo Xin Yunyong. It translates, roughly, to Model Chip Cloud Application. Now, this isn't just some catchy slogan. It represents a fundamental pivot. The focus is no longer just on making the world's most advanced chips, but on mastering how to best use all available computing power across the entire economy. And you can really see this shift in priorities right here. The old Made in China 2025 plan had this very specific target, 70% chip self-sufficiency, a target, by the way, that they missed by a mile. The new plan? The focus is now on digital economy penetration, aiming for it to be 12.5% of GDP by 2030. They're not fighting the war Washington declared anymore. They've essentially changed the entire battlefield.
But, of course, this whole thing isn't just a two-player game. The U.S. sanctions sent these massive ripples all across the globe, creating a totally new landscape of allies, intense pressure, and new technological walls going up everywhere.
So what came out of Washington's pressure campaign wasn't some formal NATO-style treaty for technology. Instead, the U.S. used some pretty intense bilateral pressure to create what you could call a de facto technology alliance. Allies like Japan and the Netherlands were basically given a choice. Get on board with U.S. restrictions or risk getting cut off from vital American tech partnerships themselves. So you end up with an alliance that's bound together not by a fancy document, but by mutual dependency. But what about all the countries caught in the middle of this crossfire? Well, this is where things get incredibly complicated for a lot of the world. Nations with deep commercial ties to both superpowers are now stuck in this geopolitical vice. I mean, think about it. A semiconductor facility in Vietnam that serves both American and Chinese companies, they now face a no-win choice. This new reality is forcing incredibly difficult decisions everywhere, from Southeast Asia to India, which is trying to perform its own delicate balancing act. You might be thinking, isn't there an international body for this kind of thing? Well, there is. It's called the Wassenaar Arrangement, but it's just not built for this fight. It requires total consensus from all members, including rivals like Russia, and it moves at a snail's pace. It's just too slow for the lightning speed of technological change. The result is that all of this high-stakes chip diplomacy is happening completely outside of any established global framework.
And this, right here, brings us to the most dangerous part of this entire situation. We are in a new great power competition, but it's a game that's being played with absolutely no rules.
So let's be crystal clear about the core thesis here. These technology sanctions have become the most powerful new tool of digital statecraft. And this tool is operating in a complete and total governance vacuum. There are no treaties, no oversight, and no guardrails. None.
This comparison to the nuclear era is, frankly, chilling. Just think about how the world managed the existential risk of nuclear weapons. Over decades, we painstakingly built treaties, crisis hotlines, we agreed on red lines, and developed a shared strategic doctrine. Okay, now look at the column for chip diplomacy. We have none of it. No treaties, no crisis channels. We don't even have agreed-upon definitions. We are managing a profoundly destabilizing global competition with none of the safety mechanisms we built for the last one. So what would a stable system even look like? Well, you'd need at least 4 things. First, you'd need agreed-upon definitions of what tech is even being controlled. Second, you need some kind of multilateral group that can actually move fast. Third, a process for neutral countries to appeal decisions that unfairly hurt them. And finally, and this is so important, you'd need crisis communication channels. And right now, none of these exist.
And this brings us right back to the beginning. This quote just perfectly captures the strategic mismatch that we're seeing. Washington is winning the battle it declared. Beijing is preparing for the one that follows. The U.S. is focused on restricting access to the physical chip, to the hardware, but Beijing, in response, has reframed the entire competition to be about the total digital ecosystem.
And so, we're left with this final, really sobering question. In a global competition that has no rules, no referees, and no hotlines, what happens when the first inevitable miscalculation occurs? That's the unanswered question at the heart of this brand new, very high-stakes game.